My name is Clara Hayes, and for a long time I believed in merit. In the kind of work that speaks louder than anything you could ever say about yourself. I believed that if you stayed late, stayed humble, stayed loyal, the world would notice. Someone would notice. And for a while it looked like I was right. When I first joined Brightwell Consulting, it felt like walking into the future. All glass walls, open spaces, espresso machines that hissed like applause every morning. I was 28. Hungry. Hopeful. I wore my ambition like perfume. Subtle but strong enough that anyone standing close could sense it. And then there was Ethan Cole. My boss. My mentor. My mistake. He had that kind of presence that rearranges a room without saying a word. Always in navy suits, shirts crisp enough to cut paper. His voice carried that low authority, the kind that made people nod before they even understood the question. When he looked at you, you wanted to prove you deserved the attention. And when he praised you, it felt like sunlight. He called me kiddo at first. I didn't mind. I told myself it was endearing, even protective. I mistook familiarity for safety. That was my first error. The second was believing he saw me. He didn't. Not really. He saw potential. Yes. But not mine. He saw fuel. And he used it. The first big project came 3 months in. A restructuring pitch for a national client that could put our firm on the map. I remember the smell of burnt coffee in the conference room, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead, the thrill of being chosen for something that mattered. Ethan said, "I want you leading the research team, Clara. You've got the sharpest instincts here. Let's make this a win." And I did. For 6 weeks straight, I lived on caffeine and adrenaline. I slept on my couch, laptop open beside me, dreams tangled with data sheets. I called my mother once just to hear someone remind me to eat. She said, "Don't let them wear you down, honey." I laughed. "Mom, this is how you make a name for yourself." If only I knew whose name I was really making. The day of the presentation, I wore a pale gray suit that didn't quite fit right. My palms were damp. Ethan was pacing behind me, flipping through my slides like they were his idea of bedtime reading. He glanced up at me and said, "You ready, kiddo?" I nodded. But before I could open my mouth, he smiled and said, "Good. I'll handle the talking. You just make sure the numbers look clean." I thought he meant it as teamwork. I thought he was nervous. What I didn't realize then was that he'd already decided how the story would be told. And in that version I didn't exist. He stood in front of the client, laser pointer in hand, charisma turned up like a spotlight. Slide after slide he spoke my words, my analysis, my phrasing, even the little jokes I'd tucked into the margins. And the room loved him for it. They nodded. They clapped. They said, "Brilliant insight, Ethan." When the contract closed, he shook hands and said, "My team and I worked hard, but this is the kind of leadership that defines Brightwell." Leadership. He didn't even look back at me when he said it. Afterward, in the hallway, I tried to speak. "Ethan, He clapped my shoulder. "Don't get too in your head about credit, Clara. It all comes around. Trust me." That night, I sat in my car in the parking lot long after everyone had gone. The dashboard lights painted my hands in pale blue, trembling just a little. I told myself to let it go. It was just one project. There would be others. I repeated that lie until it became prayer. Weeks blurred into months. My name became a whisper behind closed doors. Ethan's assistant. His right hand. I watched my ideas grow wings, only to fly under someone else's name. Each success felt like a robbery disguised as a promotion. Till I stayed. Because leaving meant admitting I'd been used. And I wasn't ready to be a cautionary tale. Not yet. Then came the annual gala. A night of champagne, speeches, and carefully rehearsed sincerity. I wore a black dress I couldn't afford and a smile I didn't feel. Ethan took the stage under a soft golden light. The crowd clinked glasses. He said, "This year we've achieved record growth thanks to innovation, dedication, and the brilliance of our team. Especially our strategy lead on the Brightcorp account. That project changed everything." My heart thudded. My breath caught. He looked straight at me. And smiled. And none of that would have been possible without my guidance and vision. The audience applauded. The CO stood and shook his hand. In that moment, surrounded by laughter and light, I felt invisible, like a ghost who'd worked herself to death for the living. I didn't clap. I just stared down at the wine swirling in my glass, dark and bottomless. After the event, my colleague Jenna, one of the few people who saw through him, found me outside on the balcony. The city lights shimmered below us like a mirage. She exhaled a puff of cold air. You know he's taking everything you built, right? I know, I whispered. Then why are you still here? I didn't have an answer. Maybe because walking away felt like admitting defeat. Maybe because I still wanted to believe in fairness. Or maybe because deep down I thought if I just worked harder he'd see me as an equal. That's the trap. The belief that decency will earn you justice. It doesn't. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, ordinary, gray, humming with the sound of office printers and polite laughter. I had just submitted a proposal I'd been crafting for months, a full rebrand plan for a major client. I'd put everything into it, the research, the strategy, the heart. It wasn't just work. It was proof that I still had something worth saying. Ethan called me into his office. He gestured for me to sit, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "We're moving forward with your proposal." I smiled, relief flooding in. He continued, "I presented it this morning to the board. They loved it. So, congratulations to us." To us. I repeated, my voice small. Teamwork, Clara. You know how it goes. But what broke me wasn't the theft, not this time. It was what he said next. The board wants a single spokesperson for the initiative. Someone who embodies leadership. I'll be the face of the rollout, but you'll manage the back end. Quietly. Quietly. Like a secret he didn't want to acknowledge. I nodded because what else could I do? My throat burned. And then he smiled. That perfect, polished, empty smile. You should be proud. Pride. That word felt like salt in an open wound. 2 weeks later, Brightwell announced Ethan's promotion to vice president. My name wasn't mentioned once. My proposal, my work, was now the Cole Initiative. That night I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by files and printouts and broken faith. The city hummed outside, distant, indifferent. I could taste metal in my mouth like blood and electricity. I'd given everything. And I'd been erased. When my mother called, I couldn't even pretend anymore. She asked, "How's work, sweetheart?" I swallowed hard. It's over. Maybe it was. Because something inside me broke quietly, not in anger but in clarity. I realized I wasn't just exhausted. I was done being good. The next morning I handed in my resignation. Ethan didn't even look surprised. You'll regret this, Clara. People don't like quitters. I met his gaze for the first time, really met it. No, I said softly. People don't like mirrors. He didn't get it then. But he would. Because that was the day the story changed. The day I stopped begging to be seen and started planning to be remembered. And Ethan Cole, the man who built his career on my silence, had no idea that the woman walking out of his office was already writing his ending. The morning after I quit Brightwell, I woke up to silence. The kind that doesn't comfort you, just reminds you how empty the room really is. No alarm. No emails. No reason to rush. Just me, and the weight of a decision that felt both freeing and fatal. The city outside went on without me. Traffic humming, horns cutting through fog, people moving with purpose. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at a half-drunk cup of cold coffee, and realized I had no idea who I was without that job. 4 years, my worth had been measured in deadlines, deliverables, and the approval of a man who never saw me as anything but a tool. Without that noise, that constant chase, the quiet felt unbearable. I tried to write, tried to think, tried to believe I'd made the right choice. But all I could think was, what if he was right? What if I really had quit too soon? Because somewhere deep down I still wanted him to notice that I'd left. I wanted him to miss me. To panic. To realize he'd lost the one person who made him look good. But men like Ethan don't panic. They replace. The first few weeks were brutal. I sent out resumes, dozens of them. Companies I'd dreamed of working for. Firms I'd researched in college. Startups, agencies, even nonprofits. I got polite rejections when I got answers at all. One HR director finally called me back and said, "You've got an impressive background, Clara. But Ethan Cole spoke very highly of you, said you're brilliant but emotionally volatile." Emotionally volatile. That's corporate for difficult woman. I hung up the phone and laughed. The kind of laughter that comes from something breaking inside you. He hadn't just taken my work. He'd taken my reputation. He'd made sure I couldn't climb higher than the pedestal he built, the one that always had him standing on top. I sold my car 2 months later to keep up with rent. The walls of my apartment started to close in, pale gray, like the office I'd escaped, except lonelier. I tried freelancing, but every potential client wanted references. And Brightwell had become my only one. I remember one night, it must have been close to midnight. I was sitting on the floor surrounded by unpaid bills. My laptop screen glowed in the dark, reflecting my own tired face back at me. And I thought he won. Not because he was smarter or better, but because he had the power to rewrite the story. I was the ghostwriter of his success, and now I was the ghost of my own. There's a certain kind of humiliation that doesn't come with anger. It comes with quiet. With knowing you were right and still losing. I stopped answering calls. Stopped seeing friends. Jenna tried to reach out a few times. Left me voicemails. Clara, you don't deserve what happened. Please don't disappear. But I did. I disappeared on purpose. Because disappearing meant not having to explain. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. I started taking long walks at night, aimless just to feel something move. The city's glow became my only company. I'd pass Brightwell's building sometimes, that sleek glass tower, all light and laughter inside. And I'd imagine Ethan up there, drinking scotch with the board, taking credit for another idea he didn't bleed for. The thought used to make my stomach twist. Now it just made me cold. Then one morning, maybe 6 months after I quit, I got an email. It was from a small consulting startup downtown. They'd seen some of my work through an old colleague. They wanted someone to help rebuild their strategy team. The pay was modest, but the offer was honest. No flattery. No hidden agenda. Just a chance. I said yes. My first day there, the office was barely more than a converted warehouse. Concrete floors, mismatched chairs, and a coffee maker that sounded like it was on life support. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe. The CEO, Maya Lin, was sharp, direct, and didn't care about titles. "You've got good instincts," she told me after my first presentation. "Don't undersell them. Around here, ideas belong to whoever earns them, not whoever talks the loudest." I didn't know whether to thank her or cry. Something in me began to thaw. Slowly. Carefully. I started building again. Not for recognition, not for applause, just for me. Still the past lingered. Every time I opened a new file, every time someone praised my work, I'd flinch. Half expecting it to be taken from me again. Trauma rewires your reflexes like that. A year went by. And just when I thought the old world had finally faded, fate, or irony, or whatever cruel author writes these things, sent me an invitation. Brightwell was hosting a national leadership summit in New York. Guest speakers from across industries. And the keynote? Ethan Cole, Vice President, Brightwell Consulting. Topic: Integrity in Leadership. I stared at the email for a long time. Integrity. If that wasn't comedy, I didn't know what was. My new firm, Horizon, had been invited to attend. Maya was supposed to go, but she couldn't make it. She said, "You've earned this. Go represent us." First I said no. The thought of seeing him again made my chest tighten. But that night I found myself sitting at my desk, staring at the RSVP form. And something shifted. I wasn't that naive woman anymore. The one who begged to be seen. I'd rebuilt myself quietly, brick by brick, scar by scar. And suddenly I wanted him to see what he'd failed to destroy. The conference was held at the Grand Regency Hotel. The kind of place where even the chandeliers look smug. I remember stepping into that ballroom. Polished marble floors, gold trim, the faint scent of expensive perfume, and thinking this was once the world I thought I belonged to. I wore a white suit. Clean. It wasn't armor. It was a statement. When Ethan took the stage, the room erupted in polite applause. He looked exactly the same, maybe a little grayer, a little heavier around the edges, but still composed. Still performing. He started talking about mentorship, about elevating others, about empowering young professionals to find their voice. And I swear I could hear my own heartbeat laughing inside my chest. Because every word he said was a theft in progress. The same speech, the same false humility, the same rehearsed morality. But the crowd ate it up. Just like they always did. Until the moderator said, "We'd like to open the floor for questions." And I stood. He saw me before I even spoke. His eyes flickered. Recognition, disbelief, a shadow of unease. Then the mask came back on. "Ah," he said smoothly. "Clara Hayes. How wonderful to see you. I hope you've been well." I smiled. "I've been busy." A few heads turned toward us. I could feel the weight of the moment, All those polished people waiting to see what I'd do. I asked, you mentioned integrity in leadership. How do you define it? He blinked. Just once. Then said, integrity means owning your decisions. Taking responsibility. Standing by your values. I nodded. Interesting. And when you say, owning, does that include the work of the people who trusted you with theirs? The air shifted. Conversations hushed. He laughed, forced tight. Well, I believe great leaders credit their teams whenever possible. Whenever possible, I repeated softly. That's a flexible definition. The moderator tried to cut in, let's keep the questions brief. But I wasn't finished. I stepped closer, voice steady. I used to work under Ethan Cole. I know what leadership under him looks like. Looks like erasure. Looks like taking and pretending it was giving. And maybe that's common in our industry, but let's stop calling it integrity. Let's call it what it is. Theft. Silence. Not the polite kind, the real kind. The kind that vibrates in your bones. Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't wait for him to recover. I turned to the audience. The irony, I said, is that men like him teach you everything you need to know about power. They just don't realize you're learning how to take it back. Then I walked out. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. It wasn't revenge. Not the kind you see in movies where everyone claps and the villain melts under the spotlight. It was quieter than that. It was the kind of satisfaction that hums under your ribs. The realization that he could no longer define me. But life, as it turns out, wasn't done writing the story. Because that moment on stage wasn't the ending. It was the beginning of the reckoning. The next few months would bring Ethan's empire to its knees. Not because I planned it that way, but because truth, when buried long enough, grows roots. And those roots were already pushing through the cracks. In the weeks after that conference, my inbox filled with messages. Some from old colleagues. Some from strangers who'd been in the room that day. Was that really true? One woman asked. I worked with Ethan once, another wrote. I thought it was just me. It started as a whisper. Then a ripple. Then a wave. Because the thing about truth is, it doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be spoken once by someone unafraid to stay standing. I didn't plan a takedown. That's the funny part. I wasn't plotting revenge in the cinematic sense. No boardroom theatrics, no scandalous exposés. But sometimes justice isn't a weapon. It's a mirror. And Ethan Cole was about to see himself clearly for the first time. A few weeks after the summit, I got a call from Brightwell's HR director, a woman named Karen Patel who I remembered as sharp but cautious. Clara, she said, do you have a moment to talk privately? My instinct said to hang up. But curiosity won. She exhaled into the line. Off the record, your comments at the conference. They started some conversations internally. People are questioning some of Ethan's leadership practices. Leadership practices, I repeated. That's a polite way of saying theft. She hesitated. Let's just say, you weren't the first to notice discrepancies. You were just the first to say them out loud. I didn't smile, but something in my chest loosened, like a knot that had finally been cut instead of pulled. Over the next month, I watched from a distance as the headlines trickled out. Nothing dramatic at first. Just murmurs. Brightwell faces allegations of internal misconduct. Sources claim VP may have misrepresented project authorship. The same reporters who once printed Ethan's name in bold now printed it in question marks. And it wasn't me feeding them. It was everyone else he'd stepped on climbing to the top. People he'd silenced. People who now realized silence had an expiration date. I didn't need to destroy him. I just needed to remind the world where the cracks were. Still, revenge doesn't heal you. It doesn't tuck you in at night or refill the years you lost. There were nights I'd lie awake, watching the city lights flicker through my blinds, wondering if I'd become exactly what he made me. Someone who needed to win to feel alive. But then I'd think of that girl I used to be, the one sitting in the parking lot shaking, trying to convince herself to be grateful for crumbs. And I'd whisper to her we made it out. One morning, about 6 months after the conference, Maya walked into my office at Horizon holding a folded newspaper. She dropped it on my desk without saying a word. Front page. Brightwell Vice President Ethan Cole resigns amid scandal. My throat went dry. There was a photo of him, staring down, jaw tight, trying to look composed but failing. The article said the internal audit found several instances of credit misattribution, unethical leadership behavior, and employee grievances. In simple terms, he'd been caught. Maya smiled. Poetic, isn't it? I met her eyes. No. Just overdue. You'd think that was the end of it. But stories don't end neatly. They circle back when you least expect it. A few weeks later, I got an email from an unknown address. Subject line, "You won." I almost deleted it. But curiosity, again, got the better of me. It was from Ethan. The message was short. "You took everything I worked for. I hope you're proud." I stared at it for a long time before replying. "I didn't take anything, Ethan. I just stopped giving." I never heard from him again. Months passed. Seasons changed. Horizon grew. Our little startup turned into something real. I mentored new hires, taught them what no one had taught me, that ownership isn't arrogance. It's survival. And one afternoon after a long meeting, I was walking home through the late summer haze when I passed a small cafe. Instead I saw Ethan. He was sitting alone. No suit this time, just a faded shirt, sleeves rolled up, eyes tired. He looked smaller. Not pitiful. Just human. Our eyes met through the glass. For a second, everything I'd carried, rage, grief, loss, rose up in my throat. But then something strange happened. I didn't feel anger. I felt release. Because the opposite of hate isn't forgiveness. It's indifference. I nodded once. He didn't nod back. And I walked away. That night, I wrote in my journal, the one I'd started during those sleepless nights when I felt invisible. On the first page I had once written, "If I ever matter again, I'll never let anyone else define what that means." Now I added one more line beneath it. "And if I ever lead again, I'll make sure no one under me ever feels unseen." Because revenge might balance the scales, but it doesn't fix the system that broke them. That's what I wanted now. Not to win. To change the rules of the game. A few years later, Horizon was invited to speak at a national ethics forum for corporate leadership. This time I was the keynote. I remember standing behind the curtain, heart steady, the hum of conversation washing over me. When they announced my name, the applause wasn't thunderous. It was warm. Genuine. I stepped up to the podium, looking out over a room full of faces. Some eager, some skeptical, all watching. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I had to prove I belonged. I began, "A few years ago I worked for someone who taught me everything about power, without meaning to. He showed me how it can disguise itself as mentorship, how it can manipulate loyalty, and how easy it is to confuse silence with respect." The audience leaned in. I continued, "But power built on silence eventually collapses. Because truth doesn't vanish when ignored. It waits." I paused. The room was so still I could hear my own breathing. And when it finally speaks, it doesn't whisper. It echoes. After the talk, a young woman approached me, nervous, hopeful, eyes shining the way mine once had. She said, "I'm in a situation like the one you described. My boss keeps taking my work. What should I do?" I looked at her and said, "Document everything. Protect your peace. And remember, if someone needs to steal your voice to sound important, they've already admitted you're more powerful than they are." She smiled, and I saw something in her. The same spark that had survived in me even through the worst of it. Hope. Resilience. Defiance wrapped in grace. Later that night, after the event ended, I walked outside. The air smelled like rain and pavement and something clean. Like a beginning. I thought about how far I'd come from that gray office with the flickering lights and burnt coffee smell. From that naive girl who believed loyalty was a ladder. Now I knew better. Loyalty isn't about staying where you're valued least. It's about staying true to yourself when the world tells you to be quiet. People sometimes ask me if I'm glad Ethan was ruined. And my answer always surprises them. No. I'm glad I wasn't. Because his fall wasn't my victory. My survival was. And if you've ever been erased, if you've ever watched someone steal your light and call it theirs, then you know this truth. You don't have to destroy them to win. You just have to outlast them. Now, when I look back, I don't see the humiliation or the pain first. I see the moment I walked out of that office. The second my silence broke. Because that was the real turning point. Everything after was just consequence. Ethan Cole took credit for my work. But I took back my name, my power, my voice. And in the end, that was everything he ever loved.